In today's video, I'm going to be giving you the top 10 tips on how to grow tomatoes. And as you can see, we've got some beautiful harvests last year. And so the tips I'm telling you are going to be the tips that I use myself. And there's nothing better than going out to the garden and getting some fresh slices for your hamburgers and tacos, or maybe even some chili with the tomatoes. And so it's April in Alabama right now, and we got some butterflies pollinating the flowers. And so that's why I thought it was a good time to get into the 10 tips. And starting it off with number one, and this is going to be the most important tip of all, and that's going to be water. And it also can be the downfall of your tomatoes if you do too much. But what we recommend is to use a natural source of water, like from a pond or something like that. Or if you're lucky enough to have a rain tank, that's going to be an even better option, as it's going to be as close to what you'd find in nature, which is coming from the clouds, which does have additional benefits for your plants. And so, besides what type of water, you're also going to want to water frequently, especially as they're baby seedlings or small transplants. And where we are, we at least water once a day. If it's something like it's already rained today or something like that, you can get away with watering once on a young seedling of a plant. But when the temperatures start to crank up, and also the tomato starts to pick up pace on its growing, it's going to use more water. And when it starts to use more water, you're going to have to pick up the frequency of your watering. And so when it's really hot and temperatures get up to 90 or so, you want to get up to potentially 3 times a day on your water. And then when you do plant up or pot up your tomato plant, you're then going to want to make sure it's extra wet. And also, I'll jump back on the types of water. You can water with regular water, or you could water with worm tea. And it's kind of like us as people. You can drink regular water, or you could drink some sweet tea. And the sweet tea is going to give you a little bit more nutrition than just water. So keep that in mind when you're using your tomatoes. And we could get into worm tea for 20 minutes all day, but you just have to take our word for it. It's definitely a game changer. And last but not least, on the tips for water, you're going to want to water at the base of the plant and not up towards the top of the plant where it's throwing fruit and it's getting bigger, because the plant only needs water where it's in the soil. And so definitely keep it at the base of the plant, and you're also going to want to do long, deep drenching of the container where the tomato is, instead of frequent waterings, light waterings on top. And it's better to just do a deep water. And that's pretty true with most plants. But that's going to be your tips on water. And we'll move into number 2, which is going to be sunlight. And tomatoes are like a living solar panel. And so they need sunlight and the good solar rays to put on good tomatoes and to become big plants. So if you're underneath a shade tree, or maybe you're on your back porch with it and there's a roof or something, you're going to want to get it out into the yard where it can get maximum sunlight. And a good way to find this is just to keep an eye on your yard throughout the growing season on which spot gets the most sunlight. And I say through the whole year, because as the sun moves, that spot in your yard might be shaded during the growing season and sunny during the wintertime. So keep that in mind when you're planning out your garden. Another tip on sunlight, a lot of people might want to try to grow them indoors or with LED lights, and that's just not going to be the same thing as the real deal, which is good old sunshine. And so let's definitely try to keep it outside where it's sunny, and you should be well on your way to getting some tomatoes at this point. And speaking of sunlight, it can be a tomato's best friend, but it could also be a tomato's kryptonite. And that is when you first get your tomato plant, whether it's from the store or you've been growing it indoors and it's used to the grow lights and you throw it outside into the sunlight, especially after doing something like I'm doing, which is pruning and transplanting. If you throw it directly out into the sunlight before it's ready, it's going to get sunburnt and could potentially kill the plant, because they're similar to us. Once you get a suntan, you're pretty sturdy with it to go back out without getting sunburnt. But once you get sunburnt and you go back out into the sunlight, it just gets worse. And so the best thing to do, and what we do, is we put them outside into partial shade, and then once they get a little bit bigger, after a few weeks, we move it into even more of a partial shade, or which would be more sunlight than what they've been getting. And then from there, let them get acclimated for a couple weeks, and then from there, put them where they go in the garden, or where you're going to put them, and let them get acclimated for another week or so. And then from there, you should be good to do the pruning and transplanting. And that's how we do it, and we've had good success. But I'm sure everybody's threw their plants out too soon before they got acclimated, and it didn't work out. So just take it easy and be gentle with them, and you'll get tomatoes, I promise. Now we'll get to number 3, and this is going to be your container. And you can't grow a tomato without it being in something to contain the soil. And so we've had good luck growing in raised pots on tomatoes, but we've also had success growing in the ground without a raised pot. And so it's really up to you. And for us, we pick our favorite tomato varieties that we're going to think are going to be the ones that we like and are going to eat the most of. And so we're going to try to give it the best chance it has, which is in a raised pot container. And that way there's no other ways to mess up the plant except what's in the container. So it is a little bit more of a controlled environment versus in the dirt, where it's connected to everything and there's chances it could go wrong. And so once you got it in a container, it also helps that you got good dirt only, and not the dirt that's just out there in your yard. And that's going to help it to where it has access to nothing but good dirt and room to grow its roots. And so when it comes to the container, whether it's a raised bed or it's a small cup, you're going to want to fill the bottom with rocks or just use soil. And this is one that we've tried many a times, which if you look it up, they say to put rocks in the bottom of your containers for drainage. But in our experience, we found it to be better to not use the rocks, because we use a lot of worm castings in our garden. And so the more worm castings you have, the more nutrients that the plant has to absorb. And so if you just got rocks, which are pretty much inert, they're not going to benefit your plant. And so, like I said, we've had no issues with drainage, and we've done this for many years now. And so, also a bonus tip, that way no one else has to go through it the way we did. We tried the rocks, and at the end of the year, when you go to dump out your potting mix in your containers, and you then end up with rocks mixed in to your used up soil. So then we had to sift them out from the dirt. So, you can do it, but definitely advise doing your own experiments and just to see if it works without it. So, but that would depend on the type of soil you're using. And like I said, we use a good potting mix that we make and also our own worm castings. So, if you are using something besides that, you might want to use rocks. But our stuff has good drainage anyway. And also on the container, you don't want to overcrowd your tomato plants with like 2 or 3 in a size like this, even though you could, because they're going to have to compete for nutrients as well as sunlight when their canopy gets bigger. And so the bigger the container, a lot of times the more of a harvest you can get. So keep that in mind as well. And also, you don't want to put a 2-inch tomato plant in one raised bed that's 4 by 8 feet, because it's just not ready for it. So maybe you could put it in like a 6-inch planter container and then work up to, a 5-gallon container, and then to the raised bed would be a better option. That way it's more established at the time of transplant. And so we'll move on to number 4, which is going to be your plant. And you can either start it from seed yourself, which is a little tricky, or you could buy a transplant from the store or somewhere that sells tomatoes. But keep in mind that it might not have worm castings in it, and if you are farming with worm castings, it would probably be better for you to start it yourself. And that way the plants had good nutrients from the start and not some artificial fertilizer that's not providing any nutrients to it. And so when you are picking your plant, you want to pick something, at least in our experience, something that's indeterminate, and that's going to make it grow without stopping, and it's going to continue to grow throughout the season until frost hits. And you also want to get one that has a lot of flavor and tastes good and not just pretty colors, because you are going to be eating it pretty regular. And especially if you do it in a container this big, you're going to be eating a lot of it. So you don't want a tomato that doesn't taste good. And free tip for you would be to stay away from the yellow tomatoes, because in our experience, they just don't have the flavor as the red ones. And number 5 is going to be your soil. And this could be the most important one, honestly. And from what we've seen, there's no upper limit on the amount of castings a tomato plant can handle. But what we do is about 70% potting mix, which has castings in it, and then we do the rest worm castings. And as you can see, we didn't fill it all the way up, and once the plant gets bigger, we'll continue to backfill it with more castings. And number 6 is going to be how you fertilize your plant, because after a month or so, they're going to need a little bit of fertilizer. And what we do is, like I said, we add worm castings to the rest of the pot, and then we also do worm tea every 2 weeks on the plant. And so that's how we fertilize it, and it should work out great if you follow those fertilization steps. And number 7 is going to be support. And just like I appreciate y'all's support, tomatoes appreciate some support as well. And there's many ways you can do it, but the best way is probably going to be a bamboo support. The next best thing could be some type of fencing or something like that that's going to hold it up through the windstorms, because they will fall over and break. And we'll move on to number 8, which is going to be pruning. And it's a good thing to take off the lower leaves that are going to touch the soil as it's growing, as well as taking the lower leaves off as you're transplanting, because if not, you can expose your plant to disease if you don't prune it. And number 9 is going to be soil depth. And in your container, the deeper you can plant your tomato, the more roots that'll grow, which mean more fruits for harvest at the end. So plant them deep and you'll be doing good. And we'll end it with number 10, which is going to be harvest. And you're going to want to wait until your tomatoes look nice and juicy and red, or whatever color they're supposed to be, before you pick them. And be easy when you pick them, and it helps to give them a little twist instead of a pull, so you don't rip the plant. So that was your top 10 tips on planting a tomato, and thank you. Catch you next time.